"Do not get in the wagon!" poor Virgin yelled at the mountain man. What he found shocked. A mountain man rides down a frozen trail and hears a desperate cry. "Do not get in the wagon!" Smoke still rises from a burned-down mission, and standing there in the snow is a trembling young woman clutching a secret she swore to protect. He ignores her warning, and what he finds inside changes everything. A crying newborn, wrapped in a priest's vestment. She says it isn't her child, but a promise she made to God. Now soldiers hunt them both across the Colorado mountains, calling her a thief and him a deserter. Through blizzards, gunfire, and faith tested by fire, the man must choose between obeying the law or saving the innocent. Because the baby carries more than blood. It carries truth powerful enough to burn a town's sins to ash. As the snow falls and the church bell rings in the distance. What will a broken man do when the only way to save his soul is to protect a woman the world calls guilty? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the falling snow, Asher watched the woman huddle closer to his campfire, her shoulders trembling beneath his worn wool blanket. The ruins of St. Agnes Mission loomed behind them, its blackened timbers jutting like broken teeth against the darkening sky. The baby's whimper from the wagon drew his gaze again, making something twist deep in his chest. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, "them wolves ain't just passing through. We need to move before full dark." Ava Bell clutched the blanket tighter, her face streaked with tears and soot. "I can't leave. The others—" her voice cracked. "They need proper burial." Asher stood, boots crunching in the fresh snow. The wind carried another howl, closer now. "The ground's frozen solid. We'll come back when it's safe." He gestured toward the wagon. "That little one won't survive a night in this cold." She looked up at him, firelight catching the fear in her eyes. "How do I know I can trust you?" The question stung more than the bitter wind. Asher touched the old cavalry badge he kept in his coat pocket, a reminder of promises broken. "You don't, but right now I'm all you got." The baby's cry grew stronger, piercing the gathering gloom. Ava rose unsteadily, her bare feet red from cold. "Let me get him." "Stay by the fire," Asher said. "I'll fetch what we need." He approached the wagon carefully, aware of her watching his every move. Inside, the infant lay wrapped in elaborate church vestments, the gold thread glinting dully. Beside the bundle, he found a small bag of supplies, some cloth diapers, a tin of condensed milk, and a prayer book with a broken spine. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, making his nose twitch. As he gathered the items, his trained eye caught details he'd missed before. Bullet, holes in the wagon's sideboards, blood spatters on the bench. This was no accident. "The attack," he said, returning to the fire. "How many were there?" Ava took the baby from him, cradling it close. 3 men. They came at dawn, asking about Indians." Her voice shook. "Father Michael told them we helped everyone who needed it. That's when they—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. Asher nodded grimly. He'd seen enough frontier violence to fill in the blanks. "The child's mother?" "Apache woman, heavy with child. She stumbled in 2 days ago, bleeding." Ava's eyes filled with fresh tears. "We delivered the baby, but she made me promise, said men were hunting them." She looked down at the infant. Her last words were a prayer for her son. The wind gusted harder, rattling the wagon's loose boards. Asher did some quick calculating. The nearest safe shelter was his cabin, a good 4 hours' ride through rough country. In this weather, with a newborn— "My horse can carry double," he said, already moving to gather their meager supplies. But we need to go now. Wait. Ava struggled to her feet, the baby secure against her chest. There's something else in the mission, something I have to get. Asher caught her arm. Whatever it is, it ain't worth dying for. It's proof, she insisted. Papers Father Michael kept. Names, dates, evidence of what these men have done to other families. Her eyes met his, fierce despite her exhaustion. The law needs to know. Another wolf howl split the air, much closer. Asher's hand moved to his revolver. 2 minutes, he said. Not a second more. He watched her hurry toward the mission's remains, his heart pounding harder than he cared to admit. The baby's cry rose again, reminding him of another child, another night of violence years ago. He'd failed to protect the innocent then. The memory of it still haunted his dreams. Ava returned quickly, clutching a leather document case to her chest alongside the baby. Snow dusted her dark hair, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that worried him. Up you go, he said, helping her mount his horse. The gelding shifted, uneasy with the extra weight, but held steady. Asher swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to secure both her and the child. As they rode away from the mission, Ava began to pray softly in Latin. The words were foreign to him, but their rhythm was oddly comforting as they pushed into the gathering storm. The baby had fallen quiet, lulled by the horse's movement. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the snow thickening around them. Asher kept them on the high trail, where the wind had swept the path relatively clear. He could feel Ava leaning more heavily against him, her exhaustion evident. Tell me about these men, he said, as much to keep her awake as to gather information. They wore no badges, she answered, her voice barely audible above the wind. But they claimed to be militia, said they were protecting settlers. She shifted the baby carefully. Father Michael knew them for what they were, murderers hiding behind false authority. Asher's jaw tightened. He'd seen their kind before, during his cavalry days. Men who used fear of Indians to justify their own savage acts, who twisted the law to serve their greed. The very reason he'd turned his back on that life. The baby, he said after another long silence. Does he have a name? Ava's voice softened. His mother called him Takoda. It means friend to everyone in their language. She touched the infant's cheek gently. Father Michael baptized him Thomas to give him protection of the church. The snow began to ease as they climbed higher into the mountains. Asher knew these trails like the scars on his hands, every switchback, every sheltered hollow. His cabin lay just beyond the next ridge, tucked into a protected valley where few men ever ventured. Miss Bell, he said, choosing his words carefully. Those men will be back. They'll track us. She stiffened in his arms. I know. My place ain't much, but it's defensible. We can wait out the worst of winter there, keep the little ones safe until what? She turned slightly, trying to see his face in the darkness. Until they find us? Until they kill us like they killed Father Michael and the others? The bitterness in her voice surprised him. Until we figure out what's right, he answered quietly. She was silent for a long moment, then asked, Why are you helping us? Asher looked up at the stars now visible through breaking clouds, the same stars he'd watched on another winter night, when he'd chosen to desert rather than participate in a massacre. Maybe, he said slowly, because sometimes a man needs to do what's right, even when it ain't easy. The baby stirred, making small, snuffling sounds. Ava adjusted the blanket around him, her movements gentle despite her own discomfort. Asher found himself wondering at the strength in this woman. Barefoot and half-frozen, yet still fighting to protect a child not her own. As they crested the final ridge, the worst of the storm passed over them. In the valley below, a thin spiral of smoke rose from his cabin's chimney where he'd banked the morning's fire. It wasn't much, just a one-room shelter with a lean-to for his horses. But right now it looked like paradise. "Almost there," he said, feeling Ava's shivering increase. "Just hold on a little longer." She nodded, clutching the baby closer. The document case was still secured against her chest, its contents perhaps as precious as the child in its own way. Evidence that might bring justice if they lived long enough to use it. The horse picked its way carefully down the slope, steam rising from its flanks. Asher's mind was already working through what needed to be done. Fire built up, milk warmed for the baby, some way to make proper beds for his unexpected guests. And after that, he'd have to face the choice he'd been avoiding since finding them at the mission. Stay hidden in his mountain sanctuary, or stand against the evil he'd once fled. Help this woman and child find safety, or return to a world he'd sworn to leave behind. The baby's soft cry echoed off the snow-covered rocks, and Asher felt Ava lean back against him, trusting him despite her earlier fears. Something shifted in his heart, like ice breaking up in spring. Perhaps, he thought, some choices were already made for us. The pale winter dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered ruins in shades of rose and gold. Asher Rourke stood at the edge of what remained of St. Agnes Mission, a shovel gripped in his weathered hands. The earth was frozen solid, requiring all his strength to break through the crusty surface. Near the chapel's scorched walls, Ava Bell sat on an overturned crate, cradling the sleeping infant. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, dark circles shadowing her eyes. The baby, wrapped in the priest's vestment, stirred occasionally but remained mercifully quiet. "Here," Asher said, indicating the spot he'd chosen. The ground softer where the chapel wall blocked the worst of the freeze. He didn't mention how the heat from the fire had helped thaw the soil. Some truths were better left unspoken. They had found Father Michael's body in the chapel doorway, as if he'd tried to save something from the flames. Asher had seen enough death to know the priest hadn't suffered long. Small mercies, he supposed. The sound of the shovel striking earth filled the morning air. Ava's soft prayers mingled with the rhythmic scraping as Asher dug deeper, his breath clouded in the cold air, muscles burning with the effort. "He was a good man," Ava said suddenly, her voice rough from smoke and grief. "He took in any child who needed shelter, didn't matter where they came from." She touched the baby's cheek gently. "Some folks called him crazy for it, mixing Indian and white children under one roof." Asher paused in his digging. "Reckon that's what brought the trouble?" She nodded, eyes distant. "The miners came yesterday afternoon, 5 of them drunk and angry, called him a half-breed lover, said he was corrupting their Christian town by sheltering savage children." Her voice broke. "Father Michael tried to reason with them, said every child was precious in God's eyes." "Where are the other children now?" Asher asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "Most were visiting families in town for Christmas week. Thank the Lord for that." Tears slid down her cheeks. "But the baby. His mother came to us 2 days ago. She was bleeding, desperate. We helped deliver him, but she was too weak." Ava's fingers tightened on the blanket. "Her last words were making me swear before God to keep him safe. Then the miners came, and the fire—" Asher returned to his grim task, trying not to think about how many graves he'd dug in his life. The hole was deep enough now. Together they wrapped Father Michael in his scorched cassock, Ava murmuring prayers as they lowered him into the earth. As Asher filled the grave, Ava gathered stones to mark it. She arranged them in the shape of a cross, placing the broken mission cross at its head. Her bare feet left bloody marks in the snow. Frostbite setting in, Asher realized with growing concern. "We need to get you proper care," he said, nodding at her feet. "Can't walk on those." "There's supplies in the wagon," she said, "or what's left of them." They salvaged what they could from the ruined mission stores. Asher found half a sack of flour, some dried beans, and a few blankets that had escaped the flames. A tin of coffee brought a ghost of a smile to his face. Ava discovered a wooden box containing medical supplies, bandages, herbs, and a precious bottle of laudanum. The wagon itself was scorched, but sound enough to travel. Asher hitched his horse to it, then helped Ava climb onto the seat. Her feet, now wrapped in strips of blanket, needed real treatment soon. "Storm's coming," he said, studying the heavy clouds building over the peaks. "We need to make it down to lower ground before it hits." The baby woke as they started moving, his thin cry piercing the morning quiet. Ava reached into her shawl and pulled out a rag and a small tin cup of milk she'd been keeping warm against her body. "Shh, little one," she soothed, dipping the rag in milk and letting the baby suck on it. "The Lord provides, even in our darkest hours." Asher kept his eyes on the trail, but his thoughts wandered to his own dark hours. Years of running from memories, of avoiding anything that might rekindle his faith. Now here he was, helping a woman who spoke to God as easily as breathing. The wagon creaked down the mountain path, every rut and stone threatening to shake it apart. Asher led his horse carefully, mindful of the precious cargo. The wind picked up, carrying the first scattered snowflakes. By late afternoon, they'd made it halfway down the mountain. The storm was closing in fast, forcing them to make camp near a frozen creek. Asher found a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock and strung up a tarp to block the wind. "The milk's almost gone," Ava said as she fed the baby. Her voice held a note of fear. "He's so tiny. He needs more than just milk-soaked rags." Asher busied himself building a fire, trying to ignore the way his heart clenched at her words. "There's a trading post 2 days' ride from here. They'll have what we need. If they made it that far? If the storm didn't bury them? If the miners didn't find them first?" The baby's soft sucking sounds mixed with the crackling of the fire. Asher watched Ava care for him, her movements gentle despite her own pain and exhaustion. The sight stirred something in him, memories of another woman, another life. Snow began falling in earnest, thick flakes hissing as they hit the fire. Ava hummed softly to the baby, a hymn Asher half remembered from his childhood. Without thinking, his lips moved in silent words he hadn't spoken in years. "Lord," he whispered, so quietly even he could barely hear it. "If you're still listening to the likes of me, help us keep this child alive." The baby slept at last, tucked safely against Ava's chest. She dozed fitfully, exhaustion finally claiming her. Asher added wood to the fire and settled in for his watch, his revolver close at hand. Above them, the storm wrapped the mountain in white silence, while below, somewhere in the darkness, unknown dangers waited. But for now, in their small circle of firelight, 3 lost souls had found a moment's peace. The storm's fury finally broke after 2 long days. Weak sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, revealing a landscape transformed by deep snow. The wagon creaked along a rutted track that wound its way toward Cedar Hollow, their progress slow but steady. Asher walked beside the wagon, studying the fresh snow for signs of other travelers. His boots crunched rhythmically as he matched the pace of the tired horses. Behind him, Ava sat bundled in blankets on the wagon seat, the baby secured beneath her shawl. Need to teach you to handle these reins proper, Asher said, breaking their comfortable silence. Can't always be walking alongside. Ava's eyes widened. I've never driven a team before. Ain't hard once you get the feel of it. He gestured for her to slide over. Here, let me show you. She moved carefully, mindful of the sleeping infant. Asher climbed up beside her, taking the reins. His large hands dwarfed hers as he positioned them correctly on the leather straps. Like this, he demonstrated. Gentle but firm. Horses need to know you're in charge, but they don't take kindly to roughness. Ava nodded, her face intent with concentration. The baby stirred against her chest, making small, hungry sounds. He needs food, she whispered. The milk's almost gone. Asher scanned the snow-covered brush along the trail. Saw rabbit tracks back a ways. If you can manage the team, I could try hunting us some meat, make a proper broth for the little one. I'll try my best. Ava's voice held determination, despite her obvious nervousness. For the next hour, Asher taught her the basics of driving, how to start and stop, guide the horses around obstacles, and handle the brake on slopes. She learned quickly, her initial fear giving way to cautious confidence. You're doing fine, he assured her. Just remember, steady hands make for steady horses. When he was satisfied she could manage, Asher took his rifle and moved into the brush. The snow made tracking easier, and he soon spotted a plump jackrabbit nibbling on exposed bark. One clean shot brought down their dinner. He field-dressed the rabbit quickly, saving the organs that would make the richest broth for the baby. As he worked, his ears caught the distant sound of hoofbeats. He hurried back toward the wagon, heart pounding. 2 riders appeared around a bend in the trail. Their clothes marked them as miners, rough men with hard eyes. They reined up when they saw the wagon, and Asher didn't like the way they studied Ava. Well, what have we here? The larger man's voice carried a nasty edge. Ain't you the girl from that mission fire? Ava's hands tightened on the reins. We're just passing through. The second rider spat tobacco juice into the snow. Heard tell there was trouble up at St. Agnes. Something about a stolen baby. Before he could say more, Asher stepped between them and the wagon. His right hand rested casually near his revolver. We're headed to Cedar Hollow, he said evenly. Looking for supplies. The first rider's eyes narrowed at Asher's stance. That so? Funny thing. Sheriff there's real interested in talking to any survivors from that fire, especially ones traveling with babies. Just then, a thin cry came from beneath Ava's shawl. The miners exchanged knowing looks. Might want to have a word with the law yourself, mister, the tobacco chewer said, about harboring fugitives and such. Asher didn't move. Much obliged for the advice. We'll keep it in mind. The tension stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Finally, the larger miner shrugged and turned his horse. Your funeral, friend. Let's ride, Jake. They watched the riders disappear down the trail. As soon as they were out of sight, Ava began trembling. They'll tell the sheriff, she whispered. They'll bring men after us. Probably, Asher agreed grimly. We need to move faster. He secured his rifle and climbed back onto the wagon seat. Give me the reins. We'll push as hard as the horses can manage until dark. The afternoon light was already fading as they urged the team to a quicker pace. The wagon swayed and bounced over the rough track, but Ava held the baby close, protecting him from the jolts. Her face was pale with fear. There's a thicket ahead, Asher said after an hour of hard driving. Dense enough to hide the wagon. We'll stop there for the night. He guided them off the trail and into a grove of snow-laden pines. The close-growing trees provided good cover, and the branches overhead would help mask any firelight. As Asher unhitched the tired horses, Ava tried to calm the fussy baby. "He's so cold," she worried. "And hungry. The milk's almost gone." Asher pulled the rabbit from his pack. "I'll make that broth right away, but first, you need to tell me everything." He met her eyes steadily. "Why are the law and miners both hunting you?" Ava's shoulders slumped. "The baby's mother was Apache. She came to us bleeding, dying from a beating. She said miners had attacked her village, killed her husband." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "She made me swear before God to keep her son safe. But the miners, they said no half-breed child belonged in a Christian mission. They told the governor's men we'd kidnapped him from his proper people." "And the fire?" "They set it to drive us out. To take him. Father Michael..." Her voice broke. "He died trying to protect us. I ran with the baby while the mission burned. I had to keep my promise. I had to." Asher's expression softened as he watched her cradle the infant. "You did right by that mother," he said quietly, "and will do right by her son." He busied himself building a small, well-shielded fire and setting up camp. As he prepared the rabbit broth, Ava rocked the baby and hummed softly. The little one's cries grew weaker, worrying them both. "Asher?" Ava's voice was barely audible above the wind in the pines. "If they catch us, if they catch me, promise you'll take him somewhere safe. Please. I can face prison, but I can't bear thinking of him in their hands." Asher stirred the cooking pot, remembering other promises, other lives he'd failed to protect. "I promise," he said gruffly. "No harm will come to him." The baby's thin wail rose again, a sound of hunger and cold that pierced the gathering night. Ava bowed her head, her lips moving in silent prayer. After a moment, Asher found himself doing the same, asking for protection he wasn't sure he deserved to receive. Snow began falling again, soft and thick between the trees. They huddled close to their small fire, 3 fugitives bound together by a dying mother's last request and the fierce need to protect an innocent life. Tomorrow would bring its own dangers, but for now they had shelter, warm broth, and the comfort of shared purpose. They took turns praying through the night, their whispered words mixing with the winter wind, hoping that somewhere, someone was listening. The morning sun crept over the eastern ridge, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of crimson. Asher sat alert in the wagon seat, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Beside him, Ava dozed fitfully, the baby bundled close against her chest. They'd been traveling since before dawn, hoping to put distance between themselves and any pursuit from Cedar Hollow. The horses plodded steadily through the fresh powder, their hooves breaking through the crusty surface with soft crunching sounds. "Whoa there." Asher pulled the team to a stop, his eyes fixed on something ahead. A wooden fence post rose from the snow, marking what had once been ranch land. But it was the paper nailed to the weathered wood that caught his attention. He climbed down, boots sinking ankle-deep in snow, and approached the post. The paper fluttered in the morning breeze, a wanted notice, its edges torn and stained. Asher's jaw tightened as he read the bold letters. Wanted, Ava Bell, kidnapper and murderer. Reward $50. The accusations continued below. Arson at St. Agnes Mission, theft of a child, conspiracy against territorial law. His fingers crumpled the edge of the paper as he read. "What is it?" Ava called softly from the wagon. Asher tore the notice down, wadding it into his pocket. "Nothing good," he answered, trudging. "Back. They're calling you a murderer now, saying you killed the priest and stole the child." Ava's face went pale. "But that's not... Father Michael was..." Her voice broke. "I know," Asher said quietly, "but they're twisting everything to suit their purpose. He climbed back onto the seat, mind churning. By helping her, he was making himself an outlaw too. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. But watching Ava cradle that innocent child, remembering the ashes of St. Agnes' mission, he knew he couldn't turn back now. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," he said, slapping the reins gently. "We'll rest the horses there, get out of the cold for a spell." The line shack appeared as a dark shape against the white landscape, a simple one-room structure with a sagging roof. But it would offer shelter from the bitter wind that had begun to rise. Asher helped Ava down from the wagon, supporting her as she carried the baby inside. The wooden door creaked open to reveal a dusty interior. A small iron stove, a rough-built table, a narrow cot with a moth-eaten blanket. "It ain't much," he apologized, moving to clear debris from the stove. "It's warm and dry," Ava answered. "That's all we need right now." While Asher got a fire going in the stove, Ava unwrapped the baby to check on him. The infant's quiet whimpers filled the small space as she changed the makeshift cloth diaper. Asher turned from his task, meaning to offer help, and froze. There on the baby's shoulder was a mark he recognized, a circular pattern of slightly darker skin, like a small sun with rays spreading outward. "That birthmark," he said hoarsely. "I've seen it before." Ava looked up, startled by his tone. "What do you mean?" Asher's mind raced back 4 years, to a day he'd tried hard to forget. He'd been a cavalry scout then, part of a unit sent to drive Apache families from their winter camp. The officers had called it a relocation. It turned into a massacre. He'd found her hiding in a shallow cave, a young Apache woman, heavily pregnant, terrified. She'd had that same sun mark on her shoulder. Instead of reporting her location, he'd helped her escape into the hills. It was the day he'd decided to desert the cavalry, unable to stomach any more such missions. "The baby's mother," he said slowly. "Was she young? With that same mark on her shoulder?" Ava nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, she said it was a blessing symbol, passed down through her family line." "How did you—" "I met her once." Asher's voice was rough with memory. Helped her escape soldiers who meant her harm. Never knew what became of her after that. He turned away, struggling with the surge of emotion. That young woman's face had haunted him for years, one small act of mercy in a time of violence. And now her son lay here, another innocent caught between 2 worlds. "We can't go to Cedar Hollow," he said finally. "Too many there who'd recognize the mark, know whose child. He is. We'll turn north instead, into the high country. I know places where no lawman would think to look." Ava touched his arm gently. "You're risking everything to help us." "Already risked it the day I spared his mother." Asher managed a weak smile. "Might as well see it through." They rested through the afternoon, warming themselves and the baby. Asher checked their supplies while Ava heated milk and tried to coax the infant to drink more. As sunset approached, she sat by the window singing softly to the child. The last rays of light caught her face, giving it an almost ethereal glow. "Thank you," she said suddenly, turning to Asher. "I've learned to trust no man but God. But I think perhaps I can trust you too." Asher busied himself with his coffee cup, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Best get that wagon wheel fixed before dark," he muttered. "Noticed it running loose earlier?" He worked by lamplight outside, tightening the wheel's iron rim and replacing a broken spoke. The temperature dropped steadily as night fell, bringing more snow. His fingers grew numb as he worked, but he forced himself to be thorough. Their lives might depend on that wheel holding true. The lamp's weak glow caught the falling snowflakes, making them glitter like stars. It was peaceful for a moment, until Asher's trained ear caught a sound that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, distant but clear, echoing off the ridge above them. He extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the shack's door. Inside, Ava looked up from the sleeping baby, reading the tension in his face. The hoofbeats grew louder, then faded again, riders passing on some higher trail. But the sound was a harsh reminder. They couldn't stay here long. Tomorrow they would need to push deeper into the wilderness, away from the reach of law and vengeance. Asher's hand strayed to his revolver, checking its familiar weight. He'd made his choice now, for better or worse. Whatever came, he would see them safely through. The wind howled like a wounded beast, driving needles of ice through every gap in their clothing. For 3 endless days, they inched their way through narrow canyons, seeking the high mountain pass that might lead them to safety. The wagon wheels creaked and groaned against the frozen ground, while overhead, dark clouds pressed down like a lid on their small world. Ava huddled in the back of the wagon, wrapped in every blanket they could spare. The baby lay against her chest, his tiny face protected from the bitter cold by a cocoon of fabric. Her voice, though trembling with cold, lifted in quiet song. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The hymn drifted forward to where Asher trudged beside the struggling horses. His hands, raw and cracked from gathering firewood each night, gripped the lead rope. Sometimes he had to break trail himself, forcing a path through drifts that reached past his knees. That saved a wretch like me. The familiar words stirred something in his chest, memories of a time before violence and guilt had hardened him. He pushed the feeling away, focusing instead on the urgent task of survival. By the 3rd day, the storm grew fiercer. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to arm's length. Asher squinted through the whiteout, searching desperately for shelter. The horses were failing, their heads hanging low, steam rising from their heaving flanks. "There," he shouted above the wind, pointing to a dark opening in the canyon wall. "A cave!" He guided the team off their makeshift trail, fighting to control the wagon on the treacherous slope. The cave mouth gaped before them, promising at least some refuge from the relentless storm. Inside, the space opened wider than expected, though the ceiling remained low. The wind's howl became a distant moan. Asher helped Ava down from the wagon, supporting her as she stumbled on frozen feet. The baby whimpered softly, his cry echoing off the stone walls. "We'll wait it out here," Asher said, already gathering what meager wood he could find near the cave's entrance. His fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the flint and steel until finally, a spark caught. The fire they built was small, pathetically small for the bitter cold. They had burned through most of their wood supply in previous nights. Ava sat close to the flames, trying to warm the baby's milk in a tin cup. Asher searched their supplies for anything else that might burn. His hand found a book, the priest's old Bible, its pages already warped from snow. He hesitated only a moment before carefully tearing out a page. "I reckon God will understand," he muttered, feeding the paper to the flames. The thin sheet caught quickly, providing a brief, bright flare of warmth. Ava watched him, her face troubled but understanding. "The words matter less than the spirit behind them," she said softly. She shifted closer to the fire, adjusting the baby in her arms. As night deepened outside the cave, Asher found himself studying her face in the flickering light. The question that had nagged at him for days finally found voice. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Risk everything for a stranger's child?" Ava was quiet for a long moment, her fingers gentle on the baby's cheek. "Love isn't something that's earned," she said finally. "It's chosen. Every day we choose who to love, who to help, who to shelter." She looked up at him, her eyes bright in the firelight. "Just like you chose to help us." The simple faith in her words struck him deep, stirring something long buried. He turned away, adding another precious page to the fire, unable to face the reflection of grace in her eyes. They huddled close to the dying flames through that endless night, sharing what little warmth they could generate. The storm raged outside, but in that stone shelter, something shifted between them, a deepening of trust forged in shared suffering. Morning brought weak sunlight and blessed stillness. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed world of white behind. They emerged from the cave, hunger gnawing at their bellies. Breakfast was a handful of snow and tough strips of jerky, but it was something. The horses had survived the night, though barely. When they hitched them to the wagon, one of the animals staggered, nearly going down. Asher cursed softly, seeing the signs of exhaustion in their rolling eyes and trembling legs. "I'll walk beside them," he said, gathering the reins. "Keep the weight down, give them a better chance." And walk he did, mile after grueling mile. His boots punched through the snow's crust with every step, while Ava guided the wagon from the seat. Sometimes he had to stop and massage feeling back into his feet, knowing that to lose sensation meant death in this cold. The baby's cries grew weaker as the day wore on, despite Ava's constant attention. They were all wearing down, humans and animals alike, stretched to the very limits of endurance. Late afternoon brought them to a rise in the trail. Asher paused, leaning against a horse's warm flank, and squinted at the valley below. There, a thin thread of smoke rising against the white sky. "Might be a cabin down there," he said, hope flickering to life. "Old mining claim from the look of the trail." Ava sat straighter on the wagon seat, one hand pressed to her chest. "Thank God," she whispered. They followed the smoke's promise as twilight gathered. The cabin slowly took shape, a small structure half buried in snowdrifts but solid. Light gleamed through a single window, and more importantly, smoke still rose from the stone chimney. Asher approached cautiously, his hand near his gun. But the cabin appeared deserted, its occupants long gone, leaving only the remains of a banked fire in the hearth. "It's warm inside," he called back to Ava, "and dry. We can shelter here, let the horses rest." He helped her down from the wagon one last time, supporting her weight as she stumbled through the snow. The baby stirred weakly in her arms, making small sounds of distress. Inside, the cabin was simple but sound. A pot of beans sat abandoned by the hearth, the contents frozen solid. Miner's tools lined one wall, and a narrow bunk still held a moth-eaten blanket. Asher built up the fire, while Ava settled on a rough-hewn chair, working to warm the baby. Outside, the horses stood in the shelter of the cabin's lee, steam rising from their backs as snow began to fall once more. They had survived the storm's fury, but at what cost? Asher looked at his companions, Ava's drawn face, the baby's weakness, his own frost-bitten hands, and knew they couldn't endure much more. Yet something had changed in these 3 days of trial. A bond had formed, stronger than the law's threats or nature's fury. As darkness settled outside, the fire's warmth began to thaw their frozen bodies. Ava's soft hymns filled the cabin once more, and even Asher found himself humming along, his heart lighter. Despite their desperate situation, the cabin's hearth needed work. Asher knelt before it, clearing decades of ash and debris while examining the crumbling mortar between the stones. A good fire would mean survival, but a bad chimney could mean death by smoke. His fingers probed each crack methodically. "Found some food," he called over his shoulder to Ava. She sat in the cabin's only chair, the baby bundled against her chest. "Previous folks left in a hurry, looks like." He pulled dusty cans from a crude shelf built into the wall. Labels had faded, but the metal was sound. Using his knife, he pried one open, releasing the sweet smell of preserved peaches. Another revealed beans. "Thank the Lord," Ava whispered, her voice rough from days of cold. The baby stirred at her voice, making small mewling sounds that echoed in the cabin's stillness. Asher found a rusted lantern hanging from a peg. The glass was intact, and a finger's depth of oil remained in the base. It took several tries with his cold, numbed hands, but finally, the wick caught. Warm light filled the single room, pushing back the gathering darkness. "The chimney needs fixing," he said, returning to the hearth. "But it'll hold for tonight. Tomorrow I'll mix some snow with ash, make a paste to seal these cracks." Ava watched him work, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. When he got the fire blazing properly, color slowly returned to her cheeks. The baby's crying grew stronger too, a good sign. Days passed in a rhythm of survival tasks. Each morning, Asher checked his trap line while Ava tended the cabin. She'd found needle and thread in a tin and took to mending their storm-damaged clothes. Her small stitches marched precisely across the tear in his coat sleeve. "Where'd you learn to sew like that?" he asked one evening, watching her work by lantern light. "The sisters taught us at the orphanage," she replied, not looking up from her stitching. "Said a woman needs useful skills to make her way in the world." A small smile touched her lips. "Though I doubt they meant for me to use those skills while hiding from the law." "Tell me about it. The orphanage," Asher said softly. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Ava's hands stilled. "It was in Santa Fe. Sister Margaret ran it strict but fair. We had classes in the morning, reading, writing, Bible study. Afternoons were for chores and learning trades." She paused, remembering. "I was lucky. Some of the children came to us, broken. But the sisters never gave up on anyone." "That where you learned about caring for babies?" She nodded. "We often had infants left at the door. I helped tend them until homes could be found." Her arms tightened protectively around the sleeping child in her lap. "But some were harder to place than others?" Asher understood her meaning. He'd seen how people treated mixed-blood children in frontier towns. "Your turn," Ava said, returning to her mending. "How does a cavalry scout end up living alone, in the mountains?" The question hit like a physical blow. Asher stood and walked to the window, staring out at moonlit snow. For a long moment, only the fire's crackle broke the silence. "Saw things," he finally said, his voice rough. "Things no man should do to women and children. Captain called it pacification. I called it murder." He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. "Last raid, I just couldn't. Rode out that night. Been running ever since." When he turned back, Ava's eyes held no judgment, only a deep understanding that made his chest ache. The days grew warmer. Asher taught Ava how to set simple snares, showing her the signs of rabbit runs in the snow. She proved a quick study, her small hands deft with the wire loops. "Like this?" she asked, setting a trap while he watched. "Perfect," he nodded. "You're a natural." That evening they feasted on snow hare roasted over the fire. After days of beans and dried meat, the fresh meat seemed like the finest meal either had ever tasted. Ava hummed softly as she ate, an old hymn that made the cabin feel almost like home. The peace couldn't last. It broke on their 5th afternoon at the cabin. Asher was chopping wood when he heard it, the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. He dropped the axe and ran inside. Ava sat frozen by the fire, the baby clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Soldiers," Asher whispered, peering through the window. "3 of them, following the creek." He moved quickly, dumping snow on the fire while Ava pressed herself into the darkest corner. The baby, sensing their tension, began to whimper. "Shh, little one," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, please be quiet." Asher crossed to them in 2 strides. Without thinking, he took her hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold, but they gripped his with desperate strength. The hoofbeats grew louder. Through the window they could see the patrol. 3 riders in blue coats, rifles across their saddles. They paused at the creek, watering their horses. "Tracks here," one called. "Recent." Asher's free hand moved to his revolver. "Probably deer," another answered. "Too cold for anyone to be up here." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, barely breathing. Finally, the riders moved on. The sound of hooves faded slowly into the gathering dusk. Neither Asher nor Ava moved for a long time after. His hand still held hers, their shared warmth a lifeline in the darkness. When the baby stirred between them, Asher looked down at its small face in the moonlight that now filled the cabin. Something shifted in his chest, an emotion so strong it nearly staggered him. This child, this woman. Somewhere in these days of shared struggle, they had become more than just people he was helping. They were his to protect, his to defend. The fierce protectiveness of that realization shocked him with its intensity. "I won't let them take you," he whispered, surprising himself. "Either of you." Ava's hand tightened on his. When she looked up at him, tears gleamed in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I know." Outside, snow began falling again, covering their tracks, hiding them from the world. Inside the cabin, in that moment of shared understanding, something unspoken passed between them, a knowledge that their fates were now bound together, for better or worse. The baby sighed in his sleep, tiny fingers curling against Ava's shawl. Asher watched that small movement, marveling at how something so fragile could awaken such strength of purpose in his heart. He had spent years running from his past, but now, for the first time, he felt like he was running toward something instead. The first warm wind of spring whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of melting snow and wet earth. Asher stood at the cabin door, watching ice crack and slide from pine boughs. 3 weeks had passed since the soldiers rode by, and the changing weather brought both promise and peril. "We can't stay much longer," he said as Ava joined him, the baby bundled against her chest. "The thaw will bring more patrols." "Where will we go?" Her voice held no fear, just quiet trust. Asher gazed westward, toward distant peaks still white with snow. "St. Agnes Valley. It's remote, tucked high in the mountains where law seldom reaches." He paused, memories tightening his throat. "My wife, she's buried there." Ava touched his arm gently. "I'm sorry. Been 4 years now." He squared his shoulders. "The valley's good land. Water, game, hidden from the main trails. We could—" He stopped, realizing he'd said "we" without thinking. "Could what?" Ava asked softly. "Could make a home there, for the little one." He nodded toward the baby, who had grown stronger during their weeks in the cabin. "If you're willing." Her smile was answer enough. They spent 2 days preparing. Asher repaired the wagon's wheels while Ava sorted through their meager supplies. The horses, rested from winter, stamped eagerly in the muddy yard. When dawn broke on the 3rd day, they loaded the last of their goods: flour, beans, blankets, and the few tools they'd found in the cabin. "Ready?" Asher asked, helping Ava onto the wagon seat. She nodded, settling the baby more securely in its sling. Ready. The wagon wheels cut deep ruts in the half-frozen ground as they descended from their winter refuge. Asher walked beside the team, leading them carefully around patches of treacherous mud. The morning sun cast long shadows through bare trees, and somewhere a meadowlark trilled its spring song. They traveled slowly, stopping often to rest the horses on the steep terrain. Ava kept watch while Asher hunted, adding fresh meat to their stores. The baby thrived despite the journey, growing stronger each day. On their fourth morning out, smoke from a campfire drew their attention. Asher reached for his rifle, but Ava pointed to a small cross mounted atop a canvas-covered wagon. "Look, it's a preacher's wagon." As they drew closer, an elderly man in a black coat emerged from beside the fire. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were trail-worn, they were clean and carefully mended. "Good morning, travelers," he called, raising a hand in peaceful greeting. "I'm Reverend Porter. Won't you share my fire?" Asher hesitated, but something in the old man's gentle manner eased his wariness. They pulled up beside the preacher's camp, and Ava climbed down with the baby while Asher tended the horses. "God bless you, child," Reverend Porter said, noting how carefully Ava held the infant. "You look like you've traveled far." "We have," she answered simply. The Reverend nodded, asking no more questions. Instead, he stirred a pot of beans hanging over his fire. "I've plenty to share, if you're hungry." While they ate, the old preacher told them of his circuit, riding between scattered mining camps and homesteads. "The Lord's work knows no borders," he said, "and neither does human need." Asher found himself warming to the man's quiet wisdom. When the Reverend offered to trade food for help gathering firewood, he readily agreed. Together they chopped and stacked enough wood to last the preacher several days. In return, Reverend Porter gave them coffee, dried apples, and, most precious, a small pot of milk for the baby. "From my goat," he explained, pointing to where the animal grazed nearby. "She gives more than I need." But his kindness came with a warning. As Ava walked to the stream for water, the Reverend drew Asher aside. "You should know," he said quietly. "Soldiers passed through 3 days ago. They're circulating new notices." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I took this down from the mission post, thinking it might be better if fewer eyes saw it." Asher's jaw tightened as he read, "Wanted, Asher Rourke, deserter from United States Cavalry, now aiding known fugitive. Reward $50. "They're calling me an outlaw now," he said grimly. "The law of man and the law of God don't always align," the Reverend replied. "I've seen enough in my travels to know justice wears many faces." He touched the cross hanging from his neck. "Sometimes mercy must outweigh duty." When Ava returned, she saw the notice in Asher's hand. Her face went pale. "You have to leave us," she whispered. "I won't have you branded criminal on our account." "No." Asher's voice was firm. "We started this together. We'll see it through together." Reverend Porter watched them with knowing eyes. "May I?" he asked, holding his hands out for the baby. Ava hesitated, then carefully placed the child in his arms. The old preacher's face softened as he looked down at the infant. "Every life is sacred," he said softly. "Every soul precious in God's sight." He blessed the child with a gentle touch, then handed him back to Ava. "You do right to protect this little one, whatever the cost." They parted ways as evening approached. The Reverend pressed a small Bible into Ava's hands. "For the child," he said, "that he may know both his earthly and heavenly heritage." Asher offered his hand. "Much obliged for your help, Reverend, and your discretion." "Go with God," the old man replied, "and stay clear of the main trails. There are more patrols than usual this spring." They made camp that night in a grove of aspens, Their new canvas stretched between trees as shelter. Rain threatened in the heavy clouds, and a sharp wind blew from the west. Above them, a red-tailed hawk circled against the darkening sky. "My father used to say hawks were messengers," Ava said, watching it wheel overhead. "Bringing omens of what's to come." "Good omens or bad?" She smiled. "Depends on how you read them." The hawk followed their wagon for the next 2 days, its distinctive cry echoing across the valleys. They traveled steadily westward, avoiding settlements, taking back trails Asher remembered from his trapping days. The spring rains made the going difficult, turning trails to mud that sucked at the wagon wheels. On the 3rd day, they reached a swift-running river, swollen with snowmelt. The ford that had been safe in winter now ran deep and fast. Dark clouds gathered as they studied the crossing. "We can't risk it tonight," Asher decided, as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. "We'll camp here. Try at first light when we can see better." They set up their canvas shelter on a rise above the river. The rain fell harder as darkness settled in, drumming against the treated fabric. Asher built a small fire under the shelter's edge, and they huddled close to its warmth. The baby slept peacefully despite the storm, one tiny hand curled around Ava's finger. Asher watched them in the firelight, thinking how complete his transformation had become. From deserter to fugitive to protector, each step had seemed impossible until love and conscience demanded it. "I meant what I said," he spoke quietly. "I won't leave you to face this alone." Ava met his gaze. "I know. Just as I won't let you face it alone either." She touched the wanted poster folded in his shirt pocket. "We're in this together now, whatever comes." Thunder rolled across the hills, but inside their canvas shelter, a different kind of storm had passed. They were outlaws now, both of them, but their shared purpose made the burden lighter. The hawk's cry, heard even above the rain, seemed to seal their pact. The river rushed below them, its voice a constant reminder of the journey still ahead. But for this moment, in their small circle of firelight, they had found a measure of peace in their shared conviction. Whatever tomorrow's crossing might bring, they would face it together. Thunder crashed through the night as rain pounded their canvas shelter. The river's roar grew louder with each passing hour. Asher woke several times to check their position on the rise, watching the water creep higher up the banks. At first light, he stood at the edge of their camp and cursed softly. The gentle ford they'd found yesterday had transformed into a raging torrent. Muddy water churned past, carrying broken branches and debris from upstream. "How bad is it?" Ava asked, joining him with the baby bundled against the morning chill. "Bad enough. We won't be crossing today." He pointed to a massive log tumbling in the current. "That water would sweep the wagon right off its wheels." They made camp properly then, moving their gear higher up the slope. The horses grazed contentedly on spring grass, seemingly happy for the rest. By midday, the rain had settled into a steady drizzle that soaked everything it touched. Under their shelter, Ava pulled out the Bible Reverend Porter had given them. The leather cover was worn smooth by years of handling. She opened it carefully, turning to a marked page. "Would you like to learn something?" she asked Asher, who was cleaning his rifle. He glanced up, wariness crossing his face. "Never was much good at book learning." "The Psalms are different," she said. "They're like songs, really, meant to be spoken aloud." She held the book toward him. "Try this one, Psalm 23. Asher set his rifle aside reluctantly. His fingers were rough against the thin pages as he took the Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd," he began haltingly. "I shall not want." "That's it," Ava encouraged. "Keep going." His voice grew steadier as he continued, though he had to sound out some words. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. When he reached the verse about forgiveness, his voice caught unexpectedly. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me. He stopped, swallowing hard. Are you all right? Ava asked softly. He handed the Bible back, embarrassed. Reckon I'm not cut out for preaching. Their eyes met, and suddenly they both laughed, at his gruff discomfort, at the absurdity of their situation. Two fugitives and a baby, reading psalms while waiting out a flood. Lord, Ava said, still smiling but serious now, watch over us in this wild place. Keep us safe through water and storm. Amen, Asher added roughly, surprising himself. They waited 3 days for the river to drop. Each morning, Asher checked the water level, marking its slow decline on a streamside boulder. They rationed their supplies carefully, though Asher managed to shoot 2 rabbits that strayed near their camp. On the 3rd morning, he stood studying the river with a thoughtful expression. We might be able to make a bridge, he said when Ava joined him. There's a tall pine up there that's leaning already. If we can fell it right, it'll reach most of the way across. They spent the morning preparing. Asher chopped while Ava gathered vines and strips of rawhide for lashing. The baby watched from a bed of blankets, cooing at birds overhead. The pine fell with a tremendous crash, its crown splashing into the far bank. Asher trimmed the branches, leaving a rough but walkable trunk. He tested it carefully, then turned to Ava. I'll carry you both across first, he said, then come back for what we can save from the wagon. Ava looked at the makeshift bridge and the churning water below. You're sure it's safe? Safe as anything else we've done lately, he replied with a wry smile. She wrapped the baby securely against her chest, then let Asher lift her in his arms. The trunk was slippery with rain and sap. Halfway across, a surge of water struck the tree, making it shudder. Asher's boots slipped. Ava gasped, clutching the baby tighter. But Asher's balance held. Step by careful step, he carried them to the far bank. Just as they reached safety, another wave crashed against the log, nearly sweeping him off his feet. He staggered onto solid ground, breathing hard. Thank you, Ava whispered, still holding him tightly. Don't thank me yet, he said. Still got to get the wagon goods across. It took hours to transfer their supplies, and they lost some to the river. But as sunset approached, they had salvaged enough to continue their journey. The horses they led carefully across the pine bridge, one at a time. The wagon they had to abandon. Look, Ava said as they repacked their belongings. She pointed to a structure nearly hidden by trees, the remains of a small church, its roof partially collapsed. They approached cautiously, but the building had clearly been abandoned for years. Half the shingles were gone, letting light streak through the rafters. But one corner remained dry, sheltered by what remained of the roof. We can rest here tonight, Asher said, checking the stability of the walls. Let everything dry out some. They made a camp of sorts in the old church's corner. Ava found a stub of candle in her pocket and lit it, setting it in a broken window. The tiny flame cast warm shadows on the weathered walls. When we find a safe place, she said, watching the baby nurse, I want to have her properly baptized. She touched the child's cheek softly. She deserves that much, a proper name and God's blessing. Asher sat beside them, his shoulder brushing Ava's. We'll find that place, he promised. Somewhere we can live in peace. He hesitated, then added, all of us. The candle flickered, making their shadows dance on the wall. Outside, the river continued its endless song, but here in this broken church, they had found a moment of sanctuary. The baby slept contentedly, one tiny hand curved around Ava's finger. Asher watched them in the candlelight, feeling something shift deep in his heart. The walls he'd built around himself over years of solitude were crumbling, replaced by something warmer and more precious. He didn't have words for it yet, but he knew his life had changed irrevocably the day he'd found them in the snow. As night settled over the old church, Ava hummed softly, a hymn he was starting to recognize. Her voice mingled with the river's rush and the whisper of wind through broken rafters. Asher closed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over him like a blessing. The morning sun painted long shadows through the pines as they crested the final ridge. Below them stretched St. Agnes Valley, a natural bowl carved by ancient glaciers and ringed with towering firs. Patches of snow still clung to the shadowed hollows, but bright green grass pushed through the melting drifts, reaching for spring light. Asher drew his horse to a halt, his breath catching in his throat. 4 years had passed since he'd last seen this place, yet the memories rushed back fresh as yesterday. He gestured toward a stone structure nestled against the valley wall. "There's the old chapel," he said softly. "My Sarah used to pray there most mornings." Ava guided their remaining wagon horse closer, studying his face. The baby slept against her chest, wrapped warm in wool. "You never told me your wife's name before," she said. "Didn't reckon I could speak it." He shifted in his saddle, eyes fixed on the chapel. "But here, in this place, seems right somehow." They picked their way down the slope carefully. Spring melt had turned the trail muddy, and without a proper wagon, their supplies were balanced precariously on the pack horse. The valley opened before them like cupped hands, sheltered and green. The chapel stood as Asher remembered, rough-hewn stone walls still sturdy despite years of neglect. Wild roses had claimed one corner, their thorny canes twisting through broken windows. The wooden door hung crooked on rusted hinges. He helped Ava down from her horse, steadying her as her feet found the muddy ground. The baby stirred, but didn't wake. Together they approached the chapel, boots crunching on old snow and new grass. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that poured through the broken roof. The simple altar remained, though water stains marked the wood. A few weathered pews still stood in rows, their backs worn smooth by years of faithful hands. Ava moved forward slowly, her steps echoing in the quiet space. She unwrapped the baby carefully and laid the blanket across the altar, creating a soft nest. The infant blinked up at the light streaming through colored glass fragments still clinging to window frames. "It feels holy still," Ava whispered. She began to sing, her clear voice filling the chapel. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Asher stood near the door, hat in his hands. The familiar hymn struck something deep in his chest, memories of Sarah singing those same words, of happiness before the fever took her. But now the music carried hope instead of just pain. The baby cooed, reaching toward a beam of colored light. Ava smiled down at her. "She needs a proper baptism," she said. "A name and God's blessing. Will you help me?" Asher nodded, throat tight. He found a battered tin cup among their supplies and walked outside to gather clean snow from a shadowed drift. When it melted, the water caught the light like crystal. Ava lifted the baby, holding her over the altar. "What shall we name her?" "Hope," Asher said without hesitation. "Because that's what she gave us both." Tears brightened Ava's eyes as she nodded. "Hope," she repeated softly. "Perfect for this new beginning." Asher held the cup of melted snow while Ava spoke the ancient words. "I baptize you, Hope, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." She dipped her fingers in the water and made the sign of the cross on the baby's forehead. Hope squirmed and giggled as drops fell on her face. Sunlight streamed stronger through the broken roof, as if heaven itself blessed the moment. Asher found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in years. They spent the afternoon making the chapel habitable. Asher patched the worst holes in the roof with pine boughs, while Ava cleared debris from the floor. They talked as they worked, painting pictures of possibility with their words. "We could plant a garden there," Ava said, pointing to a sunny patch near the chapel wall. "Beans and squash, maybe some herbs for medicine." "Could rebuild the roof proper before winter," Asher added. "Make it snug against the snow." He paused in his work, looking down at her. "That is, if you're planning to stay." "Where else would we go?" She smiled up at him, hair glowing in the late afternoon light. "Hope needs a home. We all do." As sunset approached, they built a small fire in the old stone hearth. Ava prepared a stew from their remaining supplies, dried beef, wild onions, and the last of their beans. The familiar domestic sounds filled the chapel, the bubble of the pot, Hope's happy babbling, the crack and pop of burning wood. Lamplight cast warm shadows on the walls. Hope slept peacefully in a nest of blankets while Ava and Asher sat close by the fire, sharing the hot stew. The moment felt so right, so much like family, that Asher's heart ached with it. He found himself leaning toward Ava, drawn by the firelight in her hair and the gentle curve of her smile. She turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding. For a heartbeat, he almost kissed her. But uncertainty held him back. Was this love growing between them, or just the desperate loneliness of two lost souls? He pulled away slightly, confused by his own feelings. Ava touched his hand gently. "Maybe both can be holy," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "Loneliness and love. Perhaps God uses both to lead us home." They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low. Hope sighed in her sleep, one tiny hand curled around her blanket. Through the broken windows came the night sounds of the valley, wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, the gentle splash of the creek. The next morning dawned clear and calm. Asher woke early, stepping outside to check their horses. The valley lay peaceful in the morning light, promising sanctuary after their long journey. But as he walked toward the creek for water, his heart froze. There, in the soft mud near the water's edge, were footprints, fresh ones, made by boots instead of deer or elk. Someone else had passed through the valley during the night. He stared at the tracks, all his protective instincts flaring. Their sanctuary wasn't as secure as they'd hoped. Others were close, too close for comfort. The spring sun climbed high over St. Agnes Valley, warming the chapel's weathered stones. Asher chopped firewood near the door, keeping one eye on Hope as she dozed in her makeshift cradle, a wooden crate padded with blankets. Ava hung wet clothes on a line strung between two pines, humming softly as she worked. The peaceful scene shattered when a horse burst from the tree line, sides heaving and saddle empty. Asher dropped his axe, moving swiftly to intercept the animal before it spooked their own horses. The gelding's military saddle and brass fittings marked it as army issue. Dark stains spread across its left flank, blood not yet fully dried. "Get inside," he called to Ava, his voice tight. "Take Hope with you." Ava gathered the baby quickly, hurrying into the chapel. She watched through a broken window as Asher caught the horse's dangling reins. The animal trembled, eyes rolling white with fear. "There's blood," she whispered when he came inside. Hope stirred against her chest, sensing the tension. "Do you think—" "Stay here," Asher said. "I need to look around." He checked his revolver, then moved cautiously down toward the creek. Fresh hoofprints marked the mud, Multiple horses had passed through recently. Following the creek's winding path, he found what the current had left behind. A leather satchel wedged against fallen logs, its contents mostly dry. Inside lay several official dispatches, the army seal still visible on the dampened papers. One document made his blood run cold. It detailed charges against deserter Asher Rourke and mission worker Ava Bell, naming them as traitors providing aid to Apache rebels. The penalty was clear: death by hanging. Asher's hands shook as he read. They'd branded him a deserter before, but this was worse. Now they called them both traitors, enemies of the state. The charge would stick, true or not. No judge would hear their side. He built a small fire right there by the creek, feeding the damning papers into the flames. The evidence turned to ash, but the threat remained real as ever. When he returned to the chapel, Ava read the truth in his face. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked quietly. He nodded, unable to soften the blow. "Got no way of knowing how close. That horse might have run for miles." They spent the afternoon in tense vigilance. Asher moved their horses into a sheltered hollow and covered their tracks as best he could. Ava packed their essential supplies into bundles easy to grab. Hope fussed, picking up on their anxiety. As darkness fell, they kept the fire low. The night turned bitter cold, winter's last grip refusing to yield to spring. They shared the last of their bread and jerky, neither tasting the food. Ava held Hope close, singing soft lullabies until the baby finally slept. "Try to rest," Asher told her. "I'll keep watch." But sleep proved elusive for them both. The wind carried phantom sounds. Was that a horse nickering, or just the creak of branches? Every shadow held potential danger. Near midnight, Ava jolted awake. This time the sound was unmistakable. Hoofbeats on frozen ground, still distant but drawing closer. She listened, heart pounding, as Asher moved silently to the window. "At least 4 riders," he whispered, moving slow, searching. Ava looked down at Hope's peaceful face, then at Asher's weathered profile in the dim light. In that moment, clarity struck like lightning. She knew what she had to do. While Asher watched the valley, she found a scrap of paper and their last pencil stub. Her hands trembled as she wrote, "They'll spare you if I go back. Keep her safe." She placed the note where he would find it, tucked beside his bedroll. The next hours crawled by like years. She waited until Asher's breathing deepened into sleep. He'd pushed himself too hard these past days, exhaustion finally winning out. Moving with infinite care, she wrapped her shawl tight and pulled on her boots. Hope stirred, but didn't wake when Ava kissed her forehead one last time. "God keep you, little one," she whispered. "You have my heart forever." She paused at the door, looking back at Asher's sleeping form. So many words unspoken between them. So many moments that might have been. But this was the only way to save them both. The pre-dawn air bit through her clothes as she slipped out. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, just enough to dust the ground. Her feet left clear tracks as she walked east toward the main trail, intentionally clear. Let them follow her, not search deeper into the valley. She lost her bonnet to a grasping bush, but didn't stop to retrieve it. The sky began to lighten, gray replacing black. Her feet went numb with cold. Still she walked, praying with each step. "Keep them safe, Lord. Let this be enough." Back at the chapel, Asher woke to Hope's frightened wails. The space beside him was empty, the note waiting in its place. He read it once, twice, uncomprehending at first. Then understanding hit like a physical blow. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He burst outside, scanning the valley with desperate eyes. The new snow showed him everything: Ava's tracks leading away, small and straight, heading east toward whatever fate awaited. Following her trail at a run, he found her bonnet caught on thorns. Beyond that, the tracks continued, growing harder to see as the snow began falling again in earnest. Hope's cries echoed across the valley, a sound of pure loss. Asher stood holding Ava's bonnet, snow gathering on his shoulders, face twisted with grief and fury. He wanted to race after her, drag her back to safety. But Hope's wails carried on the wind, reminding him of his promise. He couldn't leave the baby alone, and he couldn't take her into danger. The snow fell harder, beginning to obscure Ava's footprints. Soon they would vanish completely, along with any chance of following her path. Hope's cries grew more desperate from the chapel, matching the ache in his chest. Asher pressed the bonnet to his face, breathing in the faint trace of Ava's presence that still clung to the fabric. Then he turned back toward the chapel, each step heavy with the weight of choices that were no choices at all. The baby's cries pierced the snowy morning, a keening song of loss that echoed off the valley walls. Inside the chapel, Asher lifted Hope from her bed, holding her close as snow drifted through the broken roof. Together they watched the white curtain descend, erasing Ava's tracks one flake at a time. The weight of hope against Asher's chest steadied his frantic heartbeat as he secured the makeshift sling. He'd fashioned it from Ava's shawl, left behind in her haste. The familiar scent of her still clung to the fabric, a reminder of all they'd lost, and all he meant to find again. "We're going after her, little one," he murmured, checking the knots one final time. The baby's skin felt warm, too warm, against his chest, but there was no choice now but forward. Dawn painted the snow-dusted valley in shades of pearl and rose as Asher gathered their remaining supplies. He loaded his rifle, strapped on his revolver, and filled 2 canteens with melted snow. Food was scarce, just a handful of jerky and half a tin of beans, but it would have to do. The tracks Ava left were still visible, though the morning sun threatened to erase them. Asher followed her footprints down the gentle slope of St. Agnes Valley, reading the story written in the snow. Here she had stumbled, catching herself against a tree. There she had sat to rest, the impression of her skirts clear in the drift. "Hang on, Ava," he whispered. "We're coming." Hope whimpered against his chest as they descended into thicker forest. Asher hummed one of Ava's hymns, the words half remembered but the melody true. The baby settled, her fevered breaths warming his skin through his shirt. By midday, the trail changed. New prints appeared alongside Ava's, heavy boot marks churning the snow. Signs of struggle scarred the ground, deep furrows where someone had been dragged, the sharp slash of rifle butts in the earth. Asher's jaw clenched at the violence written there. "Lord," he prayed roughly, "keep her safe until I find her." The words felt strange in his mouth after so many years of silence, but they gave him strength to push on. As afternoon faded toward evening, Hope's fever climbed higher. Asher made camp beneath a stand of pines, gathering branches to create a lean-to against the cold. He heated snow in his tin cup, soaking a strip of cloth to cool the baby's brow. "Your mama sang this one," he said softly, attempting another hymn. His voice was nowhere near as sweet as Ava's, but Hope's restless movements calmed as he sang. Through the long night, he kept vigil, praying and singing by turns as the stars wheeled overhead. Morning brought no relief from Hope's fever. Asher forced down the last of the jerky and pressed on, following the trail east. The tracks led him to a rutted wagon road. Fresh marks showed where several horses and at least one wagon had passed. Near noon, he found a soldier's glove dropped in the mud, its brass button glinting dully. The sight sent a surge of anger through him, remembering the dispatch that branded them traitors. But anger wouldn't help Ava. He tucked the glove away and continued down the road. That night, Hope's fever raged. Asher bathed her tiny face with melted snow, his heart clenching at each weak cry. "Please, Lord," he begged, "don't take her too." He sang every hymn he could remember until his voice gave out, then simply held her close as the wind moaned through the trees. Dawn of the second day found him stumbling with exhaustion, the baby fitful against his chest. The tracks led down into a narrow valley where a thin stream cut through the snow. As Asher knelt to refill his canteen, movement caught his eye, smoke rising from a sheltered hollow nearby. He approached cautiously, one hand on his revolver. An old trapper sat beside a small fire, skinning rabbits. The man looked up as Asher emerged from the trees, noting his burden and haggard face. "Rough trail, friend?" the trapper asked, setting aside his knife. Asher nodded, too weary for pretense. "Seeking a woman taken by soldiers. Passed this way maybe yesterday." The trapper's weathered face grew serious. "Aye, saw them. 4 soldiers, 1 wagon. Had a woman with them. Young, dark-haired. She was walking but not willing, if you take my meaning." "Which way?" Asher's voice cracked with desperation. "Headed for Cedar Hollow." The trapper spat into the fire. "Mean place nowadays. Miners there hate anything to do with the mission folk." Asher knew Cedar Hollow's reputation well enough. The same miners who'd burned St. Agnes would show no mercy to Ava. Time was running out. "Take my horse," he said abruptly. "Just tell me the quickest way there." The trapper studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They made the trade quickly, Asher's tired horse for detailed directions and a handful of jerky. As he turned to leave, the old man touched his arm. "God go with you, son," he said quietly. "Seems he already sent you a miracle to carry." He nodded at Hope, still feverish but breathing easier in her sling. Asher traced the trapper's directions through the pre-dawn darkness, feeling Hope's warmth against his heart. The path wound down through rocky draws and stands of aspen, elevation dropping steadily as they descended toward Cedar Hollow. Just as the eastern sky began to brighten, Hope stirred against him. Her movement felt different, calmer. Asher touched her forehead and nearly wept with relief. The fever had broken. He stopped at the crest of a ridge, watching the sun spill golden light across the valley below. Hope's tiny hand worked free of the sling, reaching toward the dawn. Her skin was cool and dry beneath his fingers. "Thank you, Lord," Asher whispered. His voice was hoarse from singing, rough with exhaustion, but filled with renewed purpose. Hope's recovery felt like a sign, like God's own hand pointing the way forward. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning mist. Somewhere ahead lay Cedar Hollow and Ava. Asher adjusted Hope's sling, checked his weapons, and started down the trail. Each step carried a prayer, and each prayer carried hope. They would find her. They would bring her home. And maybe then, in that bringing, Asher would finally find his own way home to faith as well. The rising sun warmed his back as he walked, Hope's steady breathing matching his stride. The trail stretched ahead, leading down into shadow, but above them, light painted the mountains gold, promising that darkness would not have the final word. The stench of Cedar Hollow hit Asher before he saw the town. Smoke from the smelting works mixed with the sour reek of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies. He crouched low in the scrub brush along the ridge, keeping Hope bundled tight against his chest beneath his coat. Her tiny breaths came steady and strong now, the fever gone. Below, The mining town sprawled like an ugly wound in the valley. Wooden buildings slouched along the muddy main street, their weathered boards gray as old bones. The gallows stood in the town square, fresh-cut pine gleaming obscenely bright in the afternoon sun. Asher's hands tightened into fists as he watched miners gather around the structure. Their voices carried up the slope, cruel with drink and darker purpose. Through his brass spyglass, he counted at least 30 men, plus 4 soldiers lounging against the general store's porch. Their blue uniforms were dusty, their expressions bored. This wasn't justice to them, just another day's work. Then he saw Ava. 2 miners dragged her from the jailhouse, her wrists bound with rough rope. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dark hair falling loose around her face. But she walked with her head high, refusing to stumble even when one of the men shoved her forward. "There's your mama," Asher whispered to Hope. "Strong as steel, that one." A tall man in a black coat stepped onto the gallows platform. Even at this distance, Asher recognized Jed Markson, the mining company's foreman. His voice boomed across the square, practiced and theatrical. "Citizens of Cedar Hollow, we gather to witness justice served on this woman, a kidnapper, a blasphemer, and now a murderer." The crowd jeered. Ava stood silent, her face turned toward heaven. "This mission worker," Markson continued, "not only stole a child, but killed 2 honest men who tried to stop her. Her crimes against God and the law demand the rope." Asher's jaw clenched. 2 dead men. Another of Markson's lies, no doubt. He'd seen the foreman's kind before. Men who wrapped greed in false righteousness, twisting the law to serve their own ends. Moving carefully, Asher worked his way down through the rocks until he reached the cluster of buildings behind the square. The livery stable stood dark and quiet, its doors hanging loose. Perfect. He slipped inside, the smell of hay and horse sweat replacing the town's fouler odors. Hope stirred against him, but stayed quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. Asher found a clean pile of straw and gently laid her there, wrapping her securely in his coat. "Stay quiet, little one," he murmured. "I'll be right back." The livery connected to several other buildings, including Markson's office. Asher moved like a shadow through the connecting doors, years of hunting experience making his steps silent on the wooden floors. The office door was locked, but the windows weren't. He eased one open and slipped inside. The room stank of tobacco and cheap cologne. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers and mining contracts. Asher moved quickly, scanning documents by the fading light. In the bottom drawer, he found what he sought: Markson's private ledger, bound in tooled leather. And beneath it, something else. A charred fragment of parchment, its edges crumbling but the official seal still visible. The mission records. Proof that St. Agnes Valley belonged to the church, not the mining company. Markson must have stolen them during the fire, thinking all copies destroyed. "Found you," Asher breathed. Voices approached outside. He slipped back through the window just as boot steps sounded on the office porch. Racing silently back to the livery, he gathered Hope into his arms. She blinked up at him, quiet and trusting. "Time to face the devil, little one," he whispered. The sun hung low now, painting Cedar Hollow's buildings in bloody light. The crowd had grown, their mood ugly with whiskey and anticipation. Markson still held court on the gallows, reading out a list of Ava's supposed crimes. Asher mounted his borrowed horse, settling Hope securely in one arm, the ledger and mission record he held in his other hand clearly visible. Then he urged the horse forward, out of the shadows. The first miners who spotted him fell silent in shock. The quiet spread like ripples in a pond until even Markson stopped speaking. Ava's head snapped up, her eyes wide with recognition and fear. Asher rode straight into the town square, stopping beneath the gallows. His voice, when he spoke, carried clearly in the sudden hush. "That's quite a tale you're spinning, Markson," he said. "Shame it's built on lies." The foreman's face darkened. "Rourke, should have known you'd show up to die with your woman." "Not dying today." Asher held up the ledger. "Not when I've got proof of your real crimes right here." Markson's hand dropped to his gun, but Asher continued before he could draw. "These papers show how you forged deeds to steal St. Agnes Valley, show how you ordered good men to burn a mission and murder its priest. The governor might overlook some things, Markson, but not the murder of a man of God." Mutters ran through the crowd. Several miners stepped back, suddenly uncertain. "He's lying," Markson snarled. "That woman murdered nobody," Asher cut in. "The only killers here are the ones who burned St. Agnes Mission. This child's mother died in that fire, along with others. Their blood is on your hands, Markson, on all your hands." He looked around the square, meeting the eyes of miners and soldiers alike. Hope stirred in his arms, one tiny hand reaching out toward Ava. "I came here unarmed," Asher said quietly. "Came with nothing but truth and this innocent child. You can shoot me down, hang us all, but these papers will still exist. The truth will still exist, and God will still see what you do here today." Silence held for a long moment. Then one of the soldiers straightened, stepping away from the general store's porch. "Let me see those papers," he said. Markson's face twisted. "Lieutenant, you can't—" "Enough!" The soldier's voice cracked like a whip. "I came here to uphold the law, not help steal land and murder women." Other soldiers moved to join him. Miners began drifting away from the gallows, shame or fear finally overcoming their bloodlust. Markson stood alone on the platform now, his careful facade cracking. "The territory's changing, Markson," Asher said. "Time to decide what kind of men will be in this new world, what kind of justice will serve." The lieutenant took the papers, reading quickly. His face hardened as he reached the end. "Release the woman," he ordered. Two soldiers moved to cut Ava's bonds. Markson's hand flashed toward his gun, but before he could clear leather, the lieutenant's revolver was leveled at his chest. "Don't," the soldier said softly. "Some deaths need to answer to proper law." Ava stumbled forward as soon as her hands were free. Asher extended his arm, helping her mount behind him. Her arms went around his waist as Hope reached for her, crying out in recognition. "My baby," she whispered, tears falling. "Oh, thank God." The lieutenant's voice rose again, crisp with authority. "Jed Markson, you're under arrest for land fraud, arson, and murder. Soldiers, secure him." Asher watched as Markson was led away, his protests falling on deaf ears. The crowd dispersed quickly, no one wanting to meet his eyes. Within minutes, the square stood nearly empty, the gallows a stark reminder of how close they'd come to darkness. Ava's arms tightened around him. "You came for me," she said softly. "Had to," Asher replied. "We're family now, all three of us, and family stands together." Hope cooed between them, reaching up to touch their faces. Above, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bright as heaven's own tears. The crowd's jeers echoed across the square as Asher climbed the wooden steps of the gallows platform. His boots thudded against each plank, matching the thunder of his heart. He moved to stand beside Ava, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. With steady hands, Asher opened the leather-bound ledger. The pages crackled in the tense silence. His voice, deep and clear, carried across the square as he read the priest's final words. This land was consecrated for the orphans of every tribe and color. Let St. Agnes Valley be their sanctuary, now and forever. The mob fell quiet, their mockery dying in their throats. Sunlight caught the official seal on the deed as Asher held it high. "Your foreman burned a house of God," Asher continued, his words cutting through the stillness. "And here are the prophets he counted afterward." He began reading names and numbers, each entry damning Markson and his conspirators. $300 paid to burn the mission, 500 more to drive out the orphans. Townsfolk shifted uneasily, trading glances. Some removed their hats, shame crossing their faces. The soldiers gripped their rifles, looking to their lieutenant for guidance. Markson's face twisted with rage. "Shoot him!" he commanded, but no one moved. "Your own ledger condemns you," Asher declared. "Every dirty dollar, every murdered innocent. It's all here in your hand." Markson's fingers twitched toward his gun. The crowd tensed, but Asher stood straighter, squaring his shoulders against the threat. "If you shed blood here today," he warned, voice like iron, "you'll burn like the church you burned. God sees everything, even in Cedar Hollow." The lieutenant stepped forward, decision hardening his features. "Drop your weapon, Markson. You're under arrest." Two soldiers moved quickly, disarming the foreman before he could draw. The fight drained from him as iron cuffs clicked around his wrists. Ava's knees buckled. She sank to the platform, gathering hope close as tears streamed down her face. The baby cooed softly, touching her mother's wet cheeks. Then, carried on the wind, came a sound that stopped every heart, the clear tone of a bell ringing. It echoed from the direction of St. Agnes Mission's ruins, where someone had found the old rope and pulled it in repentance. The crowd dispersed slowly, heads bowed, no one meeting their neighbor's eyes. Some whispered prayers, others hurried away as if pursued by their own conscience. The square emptied until only scattered papers remained, dancing in the dust like fallen leaves. The bell continued its lonely song, calling out across the valley, a voice of justice long delayed but finally answered. Spring crept into St. Agnes Valley like a gentle awakening. Green shoots pushed through blackened earth where the mission once stood, nature's promise of renewal. Asher guided the heavily laden mule up the familiar trail, its back straining under roof beams and tools. Behind him, Ava drove the wagon filled with seed packets, nails, and lumber. Hope bounced happily on Ava's lap, her small hands reaching for sunshine. At 6 months old, she had grown strong, her laughter echoing across the valley like music. "Reckon this beam will hold true," Asher said, patting the sturdy pine log. His calloused hands, once instruments of war, now built instead of destroyed. "The chapel walls need it most." They worked from dawn until dusk. Asher's hammer rang against nails while Ava cleared debris, singing hymns that floated on the spring breeze. Hope crawled on a blanket spread across the chapel floor, playing with smooth stones Ava had collected from the creek. One morning, 3 former miners appeared at the edge of the clearing, heads bowed, hats in hands. They brought fresh-cut lumber and shame in their eyes. "We aim to help," their leader said quietly, "if you'll have us." Asher studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Every hand that destroys can learn to build." Days passed, and more came. A Navajo family arrived with their tools, the father skilled in woodworking. Together they carved a cross from cedar, its surface smooth as silk. The mother showed Ava how to plant corn in the traditional way, blessing each seed with prayer. As sunset painted the sky in gold one evening, Asher lifted the salvaged bell into place. It had survived the fire, though its bronze surface bore scorch marks like scars. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the rope. The first peal rang out pure and true, echoing off the valley walls. Birds took wing at the sound, and Hope clapped her tiny hands in delight. Ava stood in the doorway, tears tracking down her cheeks as she smiled. They knelt together on the new-laid floorboards, their shoulders touching. Ava's voice was steady as she spoke. For every child of God, no matter the blood. Asher's deeper tone joined hers. Let this place be their refuge. That night, by lamplight, Asher opened his journal. The leather cover was worn, pages dog-eared from travel. His pen scratched across paper as he wrote, "The wagon she told me not to get in carried my salvation." He paused, watching through the window as stars appeared above the valley. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, Ava's shawl tucked around her small form. Outside, crickets sang their evening prayers, and somewhere in the darkness, the restored bell still hummed with remembered sound. Peace settled over St. Agnes Valley like a blessing, as ancient as the mountains and as new as tomorrow's dawn. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.